of Cotswold National Landscape, I would like to welcome you all to this first in a series of webinars designed to help and support signal some of the way forward. We have tremendous challenges coming with policy change, and equally we could view those challenges as opportunities for better targeted policy and policy that will deliver defined outcomes to the landscape, the environment, and sustainable farming. Part of that is important that we have good engagement from farmers and landowners. And if you don't like the look of the policy that's coming, then do involve yourself with the consultations and talk to your MPs, and let's see this as a positive opportunity going forward. So our speakers today, Mark Connelly, who will be known to most of you, heads up farming and landscape within the Cotswold National Landscape. He's extremely knowledgeable and helpful. And Harold Makant, who is on the Natural England team. So I'd like to now hand over to our first speaker, Mark.
Okay, can you everybody see that now?
Yes.
It needs to be on the slideshow, Mark.
Yes, the thing is, the control panel for, hang on, I found it now. Was masking. Right.
That's better. That's good.
Brilliant. Great, okay. Well, thank you, Nick. Yes, I'm kicking off by looking at ELM, Environmental Land Management Scheme, and FIPL, which stands for Farming in Protected Landscapes. So that's sort of the second part of this. Now, ELM is the big new thing that's about to come. Are we getting slide transitions?
Might need to do it yourself, Mark, using the arrows.
Yeah, I'm trying to. It's not doing an awful lot. Technology is great when it works.
Sometimes it helps if you use in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a very faint arrow to the right that you can sometimes use if your normal clicking doesn't work.
Bottom, what hand corner was it, Jenny?
Bottom left-hand corner, there's normally some faint arrows left and right on your screen that you should be able to push forward. So go right, so go there.
Yeah, how about that then? Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Jenny. I found them. Right, well, why ELM? Well, yes, we have, as you probably realise, left the EU, which also meant leaving the Common Agricultural Policy, and with that came things like the Single Payment Scheme, Countryside Stewardship, Greening, and all the rest of it. It was never a particularly easy thing. The Common Agricultural Policy was something which was designed to be common to everybody in the EU from Greece to Sweden, and it didn't really quite fit all as was originally intended. So actually one of the things we do have here is opportunity to actually create something suitable for farming and land management in England. And we already do have the Agriculture Act 2020 in place now as well. It's not an immediate transition. It's something which is actually happening over a 7-year period, starting now up until 2027. There's a variety of things coming in as part of all of this, and these are the things listed in the Agricultural Transition Plan. And the point here is that environmental land management, ELM, is not something which is standing on its own. It's actually part of a raft of different measures which will be coming in over the next 7 years. And many of them will actually sort of dovetail quite nicely with ELM, and some will actually sort of help support some of the things within it as well. So I'll be looking at just two things from this, which is ELM and farming in protected landscapes. One of the good new things about this new system is that it's all being done through co-design. And actually work started on this in 2018. So we're coming up for 3 years now in all of this. It's been done through co-design. There's been a whole raft of meetings. There's been over 70 tests and trials. Some of you may have been involved in some of these. There are more tests and trials to come, about 20 now being set up and beginning to start up, including in the Cotswolds. We've got a couple of other ones now looking at common land and small woods as well. And the other key thing here is that the idea is that the new schemes will be much more flexible and will give you much more control as to what you wish to deliver on your farm. Now, one of the key things to this is that direct payments are being phased out over the next 7 years. This is what the first 4 years look like. It's a bit like a tax system in reverse. So you will lose 5% of your first 30,000, then 10% of your next 30 to 50,000, and so on, up till 2024. Why 2024 in this one? Well, because this is when payments will be delinked from land, and things will change probably much more quickly from that particular point in time in the future. Also in 2024, cross-compliance will stop as a basis for regulation and enforcement, and it will move on to a new approach, which will be designed over the next 3-4 years. The money, of course, which is being taken away from the single payment will be used to pay for the startup of ELM and the pilot. So it's not going to be lost to the farming sector. In fact, the government's committed, at least to the next election, that the farming budget will remain untouched by anything else. The whole basis of ELM is that it will pay you for public goods and services, and these are coming out of the 25-year plan. So yes, it'll be things like clean water, air, soils, mitigation to climate change, plants, wildlife, and of course something of particular note within the AUMB, of course, is beauty, and of course heritage and engagement and access. It's also going to be used to deliver things like the government's net zero commitments, the nature recovery network, the government's 10-point plan, which they revealed late last year, particularly the green jobs part, and this 30 by 30, which is 30% of England protected by 2030, which includes an additional 400,000 hectares of land for wildlife. And it's going to be much lighter touch. It's going to be much more flexible, already mentioned. And it's also going to enable a lot more sort of innovation and adaptation, something we couldn't really do perhaps quite so easily under the Common Agricultural Policy. And things will move, I think, forward quite quickly on some of these things. Now, the ELM is actually divided into 3 schemes. No longer components or tiers, but they are now 3 schemes. So they are the Sustainable Farming Incentive, Local Nature Recovery, and Landscape Recovery. And the first one of those is the Sustainable Farming Incentive. It will be available to farmers only, so it will be limited for that. And it will pay for actions which will help you manage your land in a more environmentally sustainable way. And it will feature things like field margins, grassland management, soils, water protection, and so on. There will also be hedgerow things in here as well. Now, this is the first bit that's going to launch, and it will launch very soon indeed with expressions of interest. You'll see something, I would imagine, probably in the next few days. So we're talking days, not weeks, before you actually see more detail on the SFI. The next part is local nature recovery. This will launch later in the year. This will be a bit more familiar and along the lines of things like countryside stewardship. So this will be much more sort of detail, and it will be available not just for farmers, but other land managers too. So people who are looking after nature reserves, country parks, possibly even golf courses, even equine, that type of thing, can also look to the environmental land management. And this will be, again, a bit much, as I said, be more familiar, and it will be things like woodlands, wetlands, creating and restoring grasslands, access, heritage, asset management, looking after your lumps, bumps and tumps in your fields, for example. The next one, which will come a bit later still, this is the big one in terms of area. This is landscape restoration. Again, this will be open to all, and this is about large-scale collaborative projects. The pilot, when it launches, will be looking at 2,000 to 3,000 hectares. Now, to me, that was disappointingly small, actually. I thought they were going to be thinking bigger than that, but then again, it is a pilot, and things will change when the scheme launches fully in 2024. So this is looking at big landscape scale change and ecosystem recovery through large scale woodland restoration, grassland restoration and creation, peatlands, set wetlands and salt marsh on the coast, and this type of thing. Very big scale, very different approach to things. And this is the timetable, what we're looking at the moment. So the tests and trials have been running for some time. They will continue to run in the future as well. There will be new tests and trials coming. The ELM pilot will be this year. And I said you will see something on this very, very soon, which will be opening for expressions of interest into this. It won't be launching as a full scheme. I think this is quite an important thing. It won't be a full mature scheme when it's unveiled. It'll be something which will develop and be added on to over time as we head towards 2024. What we do see in the ELM pilot will change when it gets to 24 as well. And also I think here is an important word about sort of expectations. Yes, the single payment will be reducing, but the number of agreements available in the ELM pilot to start with will be very limited. So I think DEFRA are thinking around about 1,000 agreements in the first part of this to start in 2022 across the country, rising to about 5,000 agreements by the time we get to 2024. All the ELM SFI pilot agreements will also run till 2024 too. So interestingly, if you are one of the first in the pilot, you'll have a 3-year agreement. If you're one of the last, you'll have a 1-year agreement. But of course, the idea is that hopefully it'll be easier then to roll into a full ELM agreement from 2024 as well. The other elements, so of nature recovery, we'll see launching later this year, and landscape scale ones after that too. The BPS payments will phase out by 2027, and countryside stewardship schemes will continue for the time being, but I'll leave this to Harold, who will cover this, but there'll be no new agreements from 2024. The start is there just as a reminder for me, really, that you will see something really very imminent. It's days, not weeks. Just touching on countryside stewardship, I guess the important thing here is that any new CS agreements will have exit points if you have an ELM pilot agreement. So there is much more sort of flexibility coming in this as well. There will also be changes in regulation coming as well. We're going to see, hopefully, a much more sort of cuddly, friendly RPA who will be giving a much more, in a way, of chances to sort of rectify any problems, hence using sort of letters, changes to verifiable standards and so on. So it is becoming a bit more, hopefully, softer. Moving on to farming and protected landscape, this is the other part in this as well. This is something new. It's due to start actually next month, and Detail on it is actually fairly slim, it must be said, at the moment. But this is something being delivered through all protected landscapes in England. This is areas of outstanding natural beauty and national parks. And it's basically to support farmers, to help diversification, to look at developing new income streams, and to help get you ELM ready as well in the future. It comes in sort of two parts. So there's a farm level sort of part to this, which is looking at things like grassland restoration, dry stone wall repairing, woodland perhaps, wetlands. The Cotswolds we don't necessarily think of as a wet landscape, but there are some really great river valleys like the Evenlode and the Windrush where there are opportunities for wetland creation. It's also there to help support sort of things like developing carbon capture and business planning as well. The other part of farming and protected landscapes, it sort of plays more on the second purpose of national parks and indeed of the board as well. So this is looking much more at infrastructure for sort of access and public involvement. So it could be improving access, new routes, could be camping barns perhaps along the Cotswold Way, and also looking at strengthening public engagement as well. So moving swiftly on in terms of sort of the summary to all of this. So farming protected landscapes in the Cotswolds will be delivered through us, the Cotswolds Conservation Board. It will be a grant scheme. It'll be something available to all farmers and land managers. It starts next month and it will run for 3 years up to the launch of ELM in 2024. So I think the idea is at the beginning of these webinars over the next few weeks, we will update on anything which comes out of ELM or farming and protected landscapes. Going back to ELM, the SFI pilot, it is a pilot. Don't expect to see the full scheme from the start. Other things will be added as the pilot progresses over the next 3 years. SFI pilot agreements will be limited in number. And this is a really important factor here, because don't forget the basic payment scheme is reducing, but the ability to go into pilot schemes at SFI will be limited. LNR pilot launches later in the year, and actually the landscape restoration strand, there will be tests and trials to actually construct what this scheme may look like, how it could work on the ground. So that is actually, as I suppose you expect, really very much third in line when it comes to launching. And I think it's my last slide. It's important to remember that ELM is not standalone. The other key thing here is that ELM is not really a replacement for single payment schemes, so you need to plan. ELM will be an income stream for the future. You need to plan to bridge that gap to 2024. So, is Countryside Stewardship an option? And Harold will run through that next. And I guess the important thing in that respect is that CS agreements will have a break clause where you can transfer to ELM if you have an agreement. And I think the other important thing here is you can be in Countryside Stewardship and you can be an ELM pilot as well, but it cannot fund the same thing. So I think there's more to come on this, but the opportunity is there to actually be in both. And I think that is my last slide, Nick.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, so a lot of information there, and I'm assuming those slides will be available on the Cotswold National Landscape website. Is that correct?
Yes, we can make them available. They aren't sort of tied up with DEFRA, so we can actually share them quite easily. Okay,
fine. So in the chat, there's nothing at the minute. And so I suggest that if we move on to Harold's presentation, and if people have questions for Mark and Harold at the end, if you could put them into your chat bar, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So Harold, on with your presentation, please.
All right, well, the first question is, as that moment of panic, can you see something on your screens?
Yes.
Good. Right, now let's see if we can make it move forward then. We're back into Mark's territory here. Here we go. Okay. Just a brief content. We'll look at what it is, which is the stewardship for this coming season, one or two of the changes, how they interlink, and dates and messages. For those of you who don't know me, and I have to say it's going to be quite a few because I have not had much interactions with the Cotswolds for quite a while, although as I was reminiscing with Nick, we did have a little bit to do with you in the mid-90s. So I did get out into the Cotswolds, but of late I've been working in the Hampshire and the Solent patch, but expanding into Thames, Solent as Natural England have changed. So we now have slightly more. And I did set up an agreement in the Cotswolds last year, a nice little grassland restoration project north of Oxford somewhere. Okay, so I think we've had a very comprehensive view of what's coming, and there is a lot coming. For my sins, I have been drawn into the world of policy a little bit, and I spend a couple of days a week working with DEFRA on land use policy, as well as delivering stewardship in the patch. So I've got a little bit of a foot in both camps. Stewardship keeps me real and keeps the policymakers real, and we then feed some of that back into head office. So the overview really is looking at what's new for this coming season. And as you can see, we've got air quality is being brought in, and I gather that Andrew Russell, my colleague from Catch and Sensitive Farming, is going to be giving you some insights on that one, so I don't need to touch that at all. But we do have the capital grants, which have been up, and the rates have increased for this coming season. So you can see there the basic outline of stewardship as it has been for the last few years. The change in emphasis with regard to the oversight stroke regulation stroke inspection regime, I think, will be one of the big changes that we're going to see. And as of the departure from Europe, our domestic rules will apply, which should make it more appropriate. And hopefully we'll have a much more sensible relationship with agreement holders, and one which does not endanger the same amount of fear and loathing as we have had in the past. I suppose with this slide, what I want to say is that Natural England, it's not our scheme anymore. You know, the RPA took back all the authority for it a couple of years ago, and all the administration of it. All the staff who had been doing admin on our behalf of Natural England on schemes all got drawn back into the RPA. And we are deliverers. We will provide them with recommendations. We will provide them with our thoughts, but ultimately it is their scheme. And the fraught question of questions of derogations and how you can make alterations, I would say you need to go via the RPA for that one. But if you do know a project officer who can support you in your request, then always get us involved. But it is not our say. RPA are the ones who rule the roost in this one. As you can see here with the changes for 21, we've got the capital grants, discuss those a bit, air quality, thankfully Andrew's doing that. Educational access is coming into mid-tier, and then uplands. And I don't know, the upland area. I'm sure you've seen all this one before. Absolutely brilliant, isn't it, to see a chart where you can't read any of the writing on it. But key dates are all on one piece of paper or screen, so to speak. The address is at the top. If the slides are being distributed later, you can find it. If not, it's a dead easy one just to put into Google RPA stewardship 21 and it should pop up. So that's that one. But yes, you know, it kind of shows how it all interlinks. If we then start looking in at just the various little components, the tiers, you know, what's different in the capital grant scheme standalone as from last year, and the two changes really is increasing the amount of grant available. So we've gone up from £10,000 to £20,000. So especially if you're doing standalone water quality work such as concreting and the rest of it, that was always at 10 grand was a little bit tight. 20 grand to give you a little bit more. You can stack the three components together. So if you really want to go big, you can have up to £60,000 of the grants. It's also expanded the coverage, so it's no longer quite as tightly focused as before. So fencing will come into it, which is with hedgerow and hedgerow maintenance is often an issue with the amount of deer out there grazing off your recently restored hedge line, and that's quite a useful one. And the other big changes for people who have rolled over their HLS agreements, sadly it's not available for Countryside Stewardship agreements, but you will be able to access the standalone capital grant if you have an HLS agreement, which we've rolled over. And for some people, that's quite a useful one to do, because after 10 years or 11 years of in stewardship as HLS as you've rolled over, you might fancy doing a little bit more. So that, I think, is a positive development, and I'm pleased to see that's in there. But you do need to get your skates on, and as you can see, you know, if you want to get from the catchment sensitive farming guys involved, you've got to get them involved to get their endorsements, and for any of the other ones, you need it by the 30th of April. So you know, time is pressing with that one, right? So hopefully that covers capital grants, gives you an idea that there are improvements, there's more to be had. And I think it also ties into the concept of getting more money into the rural economies, which after the year that we've had isn't a bad thing. The wildlife offers are exactly the same as before. Nothing changes there. They're still not in this non-competitive version, provided you do the mixes as is with the 20 odd options in arable, for instance, and you mix them up in the correct proportions, then you're in. Dates to think about is that if you're doing it by paper, you got to get that in by the 28th of May, and then the application by the end of July. And that seems a long time away, doesn't it? But it always catches you out at the end. There's always a bit of a rush to the finish line. So just be aware that that one is there. And it says no capital grants with this one, which is true, because that's simple. But if you felt like it, you could sort of have two agreements in one. Now, yeah, that does beg the question, why not just do a standard mid-tier where everything is in one agreement rather than two? But, you know, we're not going to tell you how to apply and how to use the schemes as is. That's your choices. So as you can see here, we've got the broader range of options in mid-tier. You can be quite inventive with the way that you put them in. And here we see a picture on the right-hand side of the way that AB8, which is the floristically enhanced margins, are being used in one of these assist type programs where they're running up the middle of the field as insect reservoirs, so that during the season, out come your beetles and keep the aphids quite happy. A useful thing for integrated pest management, or is it integrated farm management? Dates down here, as you can see. If you're doing it online, you've got a little bit longer to get your application in end of June, but you then, that's for the request for the pack, but you do need to be getting everything in by the end of July. So hopefully, again, that one is fairly obvious. Oh, I've done that. Move your slide around. But anyway, that's the thing. Oh, and then on the mid-tier with the capital grants, now there's another little bit of a change for this time round, is they've capped them. So whilst it might seem that £50,000 for hedgerows and boundaries is a large amount, I can tell you quite categorically, we have seen in the past some absolutely enormous grant applications coming through on that one. And similarly with the water and the air quality, that's capped at 120,000. And again, in the past, we have seen some quite significant ones in that. And I think DEFRA are getting a little bit nervous about the amount of money involved and, dare I say, the concept of value for money. That then brings in the question as to how are DEFRA or the RPA scoring these things? And I would say is that it is always good and always wise to have a well-rounded application, so that when any sort of assessment is made, we can see and they can see that you are addressing all the various components and the threads rather than just going for one thing and one thing alone. But it is one which we need to be mindful of, is that there have been some very ambitious applications coming in the past and some significant ones, and some of them are sort of, you know, people have really got the message that CS is going to be helpful for replacing BPS. And as a consequence, there have been some very significantly large agreements coming through. Then the question really comes in, if you are thinking about higher tier or mid tier. Higher tier is where we as Natural England get involved. Hopefully, if you've been thinking about it for this coming season, you've had a conversation with one of my colleagues in the patch, you've registered your interest, we've managed to get you on the pipeline. Because a lot of one of the things we need to be careful of is the amount of commitment that we can make at Natural England. You know, we're not as numerous as we used to be, and the schemes take longer to get through, so it's a capacity issue, which is why quite a few people have been, say, offered mid-tier or suggested that mid-tier is where they should be rather than higher tier. But you can see that we do have under mid-tier, you've got over 150 options and things possible that you could be doing. So a lot of what we've been doing in the past as HLS agreements could in reality be done under the mid-tier theme. Sadly, you won't have your friendly Natural England officer turning up to have a chat and a cup of tea and all those sorts of things. But then again, we've not done that for a year. So what are you missing out on? So if you are moving into the higher tier, it is always useful to know what's on offer and how that differs. And with this one, I've pulled out the various options, and you can see that the vast majority, there's a lot of options for most of these categories that we're dealing with, which will be covered under mid-tier. Yeah, so when you get to the bottom of the table, the woodland, coastal is difficult, flood risk, yes, more things to be done in higher risk, in the higher tier. With the priority habitats, we managed to get the GS6 type quality grassland in there, which for a lot of people is what they need. But here's the but, there's always a but. You do need to get that registered on the priority habitat layer, which is held on Magic. And if it's not on there, then the RPA will say, well, it's not priority habitat. Some of that priority habitat is already on the system, but some of it isn't, and you have to get your skates on with that one. So I think that's one where we might sort of still have some issues with coming in for this coming season. But from the higher skiing, for the higher priority ones, then we don't need it to be on that because it's an assessment from the project officer whether or not you've got quality habitat or you've got the potential for making it into quality habitat with a restoration type option. And with priority habitat, we've got creation, which is always under higher tier. So if you feel that you want to restore large areas of quality species-rich grassland, then it's a conversation that we would like to have with you, especially when you think about the one I did last year in north of Oxford. I think we did about 30 hectares, which was quite a big chunk of it, and you know it fitted nicely. So we like to see that because it also helps us meet some of the various targets of priority habitat we have within the scheme. And then just finally on this one, just the dates that you've got to be aware of. Yes, by now you should be in the application pack request phase. So you've got to get that in by the end of this month. Get it returned to us at the end of April. So, you know, if you need a bit of a conversation as to what you should be putting in, or we've put you on the pipeline and you have questions, then now's your opportunity. That means that the RPA will then do their eligibility checks to make sure everything is tickety-boo. We do some scoring, and that's at a national level. It's not just here in the local patch. It has to be so that everybody up north and all the way down to Cornwall, there's a kind of a level playing field, and you're not disadvantaging certain areas. So there is an element of scoring, which is done. It's rarely do we tell people that we don't want them in. You know, we you know that you haven't got what it takes, but we do need to be mindful that there are some value for money elements, and also you've got to make the grade over the summer when we get out. And at the moment we're not out, but hopefully as the vaccines kick in and all that stuff, there will be a freeing up, and we as project officers will get out onto the farm and negotiate. By the end of summer, we should then hand it over to the RPA. and they do all the necessary processing so they can get the things out either before Christmas or just after. And I will add that on this one here is that we have till the end of September to get your quotes in if you're doing anything a little bit grand. Say you want to get a seed mix out from one of the various things, or you've got to get quotes for some building work if you're doing anything fancy. So we've got really to the end of September to hand it in. So hopefully, he says, hopefully that will give you everything. And then, as we say, we can look to the future. And it is going to be a different one. There's much happening, for instance, with the way that schemes could be rolled over. At the moment, we're doing annual rollovers for HLS, Countryside Stewardship. The first couple of tranches are being offered rollovers, which we're bringing everything up to this sort of knife edge of 2024. And considering we've got something like 27,000 existing CS agreements and HLS agreements, I think it was about 23,000 HLS agreements. That's going to be a lot of agreements to roll over in 24. You might ask yourself, how's that going to work? So we are looking at mechanisms to extend beyond 24, just really to sort of to give people opportunities so they're not in the bun fight, which could be 2024 when ELM SFI kicks off. So it is still a developing picture, as you always know. I think the only thing which I've learned, well, one of the things I've learned in this job is that change is constant. And that's about the only thing you can really rely on. I'll stop there, Nick, before you tell me to shut up, because, you know, and if there are any questions which have come in, I'm sure that Scott's been keeping an eye on them. And we go from there, and I shall stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Harold. So there are currently 3 questions in the chat. First one from Tanya regarding specifically to the Breeden Hill, which she says sits on the border but just outside or has been excluded from Cotswold National Landscape Fund in previous schemes. Mark, can you answer that? Will that particular zone remain outside of the curtilage? And I assume the answer is yes. But
I'm not entirely clear what Tony's driving at here. I mean, Breeden Hill is within the Cotswolds A and B, but it happens to be in a different national character area. And therefore it gets picked up by Severn and Avon Vales when it comes to targeting for countryside stewardship. I mean, this is how ELM will end up becoming still being sorted out. There will be local prioritization when it comes to the nature recovery part of it, which is likely, but you know, it's not decided yet, likely to be sitting alongside the county local nature recovery strategies, but we'll see how that actually pans out. Okay, thank you.
If I could just add a bit on that one, just to really develop Mark's project about, you know, the eligibility story, the scoring, the prioritization. There is at the moment a concept of using it on county-based conveners, and you have, you know, one person looking after a whole county, which is a nice sort of geographically tight and beautifully organized. But what happens then when you have your national character areas which meld into other patches? And what happens if you've got, say, such as Hampshire, you've got a little sliver of Salisbury Plain right on the edge of the western edge of Hampshire? And who looks after that? So we do need to, I think, explore a little bit further how the convener, who will be based on a county by county basis, taking in the local requirements and that local targeting, how that will actually work in the future. But it hopefully isn't going to be, as we have had in the past, this sort of centralized diktat coming from on high saying these are the things that you must be looking after. And I think, you know, that's never really worked.
Nick, it's worth mentioning, if I can, there are actually 5 pilots nationally looking at local nature recovery strategies, and sitting alongside those are also, if you like, pilot ELM conveners as well. So it is being tried and tested at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Martin Whitaker, and this is pertinent to well, I would say every farmer in England. His question is, we're not all organic. He's in a higher level scheme, and he wants to know how he bridges the gap until he can join the new scheme in 2024. Other than his landlord, going to his landlord for a rent reduction. But I mean, the financial challenge is there, and certainly DEFRA have been criticised on many occasions for the timing and what's now being called the hungry gap. I know we use that for farmland birds where they run out of food in the winter. I think farmers are using it for the transitional and with the loss of the BPS and the availability of new funding mechanisms which they can join and participate in.
I suppose I would pick that one up since
Please.
it is sort of our patch. Yes, I do find it was frustrating, and I never really understood why organic farmers weren't allowed to extend in the same way with HLS agreements as we had. But those decisions were sort of driven by the European legislation, and I don't think there was an appetite to change everything for a couple of years. However, if you go into Countryside Stewardship, and one of my big organic farmers he's actually going to be doubling the amount of money that he's getting. So he's under a CS agreement, and he's thought about things. We've had those discussions. So whilst he will have a gap in funding between the HLS agreement finishing and the CS starting, he's using it as an opportunity to refocus that agreement into Countryside Stewardship, CS. It's a higher tier, so that's fine. And then post 24, if you feel that there is a better offer under the ELM, then it's within your rights and your prerogative to terminate your existing scheme and move into the next one. I don't know if that answered the question, but it is that is the system we have at the moment, and the idea of refocusing your current scheme into a Countryside Stewardship, I think, has to be you need to look at that one.
And I think with all of this change, it's about information is all, there is lots of support out there through all sorts of organisations, and it's about engaging really. That doesn't mean that there won't be a shortfall in income. I think we understand that there will be, and I wouldn't say that we accept it as a good thing, but nevertheless, change is coming. So engagement and seeking help is the best way forward. And AONB, Cotswold National Landscape, Natural England, FWAG, NFU, CLA, they're all there, Wildlife Trust, etc. So next question, best way to apply for capital grants under extended HLS agreements, and that's from Nick P.
Get yourself an application pack ASAP. Phone up the RPA and tell them what you want, and then they'll get that in, and it will be ready for. So you've got to get it in quite early. So don't hang around, Nick P. Ask for that application pack and fill it and move and get it back to the RPA.
Thank you, Harold. Next question from Jenny Phelps, FWAG. Harold, it's imperative the government supports transformative CS agreements to help with the BPS reductions. I've been told that George Eustace has said he will meet the budgets of these potentially huge CS agreements that are coming in thick and fast to support regenerative agricultural transition. How do we ensure that this actually happens and everyone gets their agreement? So I think, well, sorry, I'll just finish reading that. As everyone gets their agreement, as long as they're all well constructed, targeted agreements, what do we need to do to lobby to ensure this and no one is left out? So what I think the big anxiety is big scheme applications, limited budget, it runs out, and then not everybody gets a bite of the apple.
And I wouldn't disagree with that analysis. It does concern me in some respects. But having questioned some of the bean counters, they say that they're confident that the money is there to be had. I think it's the key is to have it as a well-constructed and well-rounded one, so that you won't be thrown out for just being a single issue politics. And I think that is the thing to look at. But yes, money the discussions I had with some of the DEFRA accountants or crystal ball gazers, they were confident that there would be enough in. It kind of asks the question, say, with the protected landscape, the landscape recovery one, you know, at the moment, that's a bit in the future. So I don't think that's going to impact upon this financial year. But in future years, it could start to impact upon us. And all we can say is that as money is being recycled from BPS into the stewardship pot, at the moment, the projections are that sufficient. But if you feel that you need to make your concerns known to the top of the tree, then send them an email.
Thank you. Harold, another one for you. Lyndall Gibson, and it's the same theme as Martin Whitaker's. It says, are they right in thinking that organic schemes can't be extended, but non-organic ones can? And is there any chance of this decision being overturned?
Well, the first analysis is that they at the moment are not, and I doubt very much that DEFRA will have the bandwidth to do that. So I'm afraid the answer really has to be no. It's not ideal, but I can't see that being revisited at this stage. One thing which might help a little bit, though, is that the RPA were looking at quarterly start dates rather than annual start dates. So the gap between agreements might not be as great as it was before. But at the moment, for this coming season, they haven't managed to land that particular project or that particular idea. We have to wait and see on that one.
So it'd probably be a good thing if organic farmers want to push that for a decision change, that they engage with their own MPs. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. We live in a political world, and people do need to respond to their concerns of constituents, and it is something, if you feel that is something which is within the gift of DEFRA, now that we're in domestic rules, they might want to look at it again. So yes, okay. Put the pressure on and see where you get to.
Thank you. Another one, Harold, from Mark Tufnell. It says, bearing in mind that there's only been 12 higher tier applications go through the sifting hat for 2020. Is it worth him applying for 2021? And what happens if he doesn't make it, and will he still be able to join mid-tier?
Didn't quite catch all the questions then. You kind of broke up a bit, but you know, it's not exclusive. So if you go through with the higher tier, it depends really how realistic it is with what you're asking for. And sometimes we have seen some of these things come through as higher tier applications, and when you look at them, there isn't a lot in there which makes them higher tier. So I'd ask that one, and maybe it's a discussion we can have offline. Yeah. If you don't get the higher tier, there's always mid tier, and that will, because of the way the dates are working, your decision will be made by the sort of early May to let you know whether or not you've passed or not. So you've still got ample time then to work up mid tier. And weirdly enough, you know, for us lot who've been with Natural England for a while, we still kind of work on a bit of a value for money basis. And I don't. Whereas I see with some of the mid-tiers, and I think this was kind of where Jenny was coming from, some of them are very ambitious, and they are significantly better off or higher paying agreements in mid-tier than there are in higher tier. So it's not one or the other. I think both of them are in the same category now, is that they are very useful mechanisms for bringing in additional funding into the farm.
Okay, thank you. Capital grant. So this is a statement rather than a question from Sarah. She says, Sarah's with Thwang. Capital grant application online through RPA account is the easiest way. The next question is.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Good to hear feedback from the shop floor and the coal face. I'm glad.
Just reading the next one. It's asking for clarification on Sarah Wells' earlier question, which is the one that we've just referred to. I'm saying capital grants /MT, please, question mark. What's MT?
Mid-tier.
Mid-tier, yeah, sorry.
Richard, the one from Sarah was, Harold, can you use capital grant on SBI with existing mid-tier CS agreement if it is not on the same field parcels? My understanding is this is allowed.
And I would agree with you with that one, because CS is not a whole farm scheme. And so if you have parts of that SBI sitting outside of current wrapper, CS wrapper, you've got a bit of land over here, it's got nothing on it, yeah, you can do it. Now think about the way that the National Trust or the Wildlife Trust or people like that do. They run one single SBI, and yet they've got multiple agreements going over multiple bits of land over multiple years.
Thank you, Harold. We're coming towards the end of the session, and Mark's put another question. Do Natural England have a project officer in the Cotswolds? You've alluded to the fact that we won't be getting project officers. Obviously, quite a few of us enjoyed the relationship and found it extremely helpful to have project officers. Can you give us a summary of the future? Are we not going to have a county projects officer or an individual project officer assigned? Do we rely on AONB and FWAG and other organisations to support with all this?
Is this a loaded question, Nick?
Well,
have I paid you to say a wonderful Natural England? You're absolutely right. In the brave new world, you know, it has yet to be decided where that advice and how that advice will be coming down and how you as individuals will tap into it. If we assume for the moment that we still have the higher tier and we still have the HLS agreements, then we should still have Natural England staff in the field. The churn that we have certainly in the southeast region with the number of staff which come round and round and go off somewhere else is quite astounding. I'm quite anomalous, and there are a few people in my position who've been with the organisation for 20 years now and that sort of stuff, but we do have a huge turnover, and it is very difficult sometimes. And also from your point of view, upsetting or disruptive to you've got to re-establish a relationship. So we're doing it on counties, and we'll assume that we're in the county of Oxfordshire because that is the one. And at the moment, we've just got a couple of new people started up in the county, Jamie and Sophie, but it's going to take them a little while to get used to it. We've still got, you know, some of the old gang, with the likes of Alison Muldahl retiring a year or so ago. You know, that's a hole which we're having to fill because she did have a big presence in the county. But if you do want to, you know, just ping me an email and to show where it is you are, and then we can take that conversation further, because I think it is important, and I think, you know, we all know that human relationships make this a much more productive for everybody, the scheme and project. And if we're just doing everything as a transaction on a computer screen, I'm not convinced that we get everything that we want out of it, and you as individuals will struggle as well.
Thank you, Harold. So our time is just about up. Just a few things to close off. Well, firstly, thank you to both Harold and Mark and Cotswold National Landscape, and also to Scott Brown, who's the Cotswold Champions Project Officer. He's in the background organising and pulling things together on this and many other projects. I think anybody that wants to contact you, I'm sure you're welcome to make contact direct regards any specific queries for Natural England or Cotswold National Landscape. Scott, would you like just to say a few things about the next webinar? And this is the first in a series of short targeted webinars aimed to last for about an hour to allow people to engage. So there is one on Thursday the 11th between 11 and 12. Scott, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, that's going to be in farming and water. So we've got Andrew Russell from Natural England, Catchment Sensitive Farming Officer, will provide background on sort of CS options relating to that. And we're going to have Farmer Matthew Izod from the Chipping Norton, who's going to provide a kind of insight from his perspective into some of the schemes he's been part of and his current mid-tier CS agreement as well. So yeah, so same registration process as for this one. It's up on the Eventbrite page, and I'll send emails around to people who've attended this as well. And I'm try and get some feedback from people, I think, as well, on how smooth it was to join. I've heard that some people had trouble getting on today, so it'd be interesting to iron out what those problems were. So if anyone did have problems logging on today, please let me know so I could try and fix it for next time, make sure it doesn't happen again.
Well, thank you. So special thanks to Mark and to Harold. I'd be failing if I didn't point out that the Cotswold National Landscape is one of 44 special zones within national parks. It is the largest AONB, although it's now called Cotswold National Landscape. And if it were to become a national park, it would be the third largest national park. It's a very special area. We're all very proud of it, and sustainable farming plays a very big part of that. So getting the environmental and the economic sustainability right going forward, it's a challenge. It's going to be a lot of change, but I think that we should all be pretty positive about this and engage as much as possible. Thank you to our audience for joining, and we hope you can join some, if not all, of the other webinars.
Let's press leave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.